OK, let's discuss Arsenal right now then on the Football Show. James, let's come to you. David Raya, I guess, is the only place to start. The hero of the shootout. He came back into the team. Did he seize this opportunity with both gloves?
He absolutely did. He became the first goalkeeper to make at least 2 saves in the Champions League shootout since Petr Cech for Chelsea in the final in 2012. But incredibly, last night was the first Champions League match to go to a penalty shootout since 2016. That final between Atletico Madrid and Real Madrid. Cristiano Ronaldo scoring the goal to seal the trophy for Real. And last night's showing certainly seems to have settled any lingering arguments about Mikel Arteta's judgment and Raya's status as Arsenal's first-choice goalkeeper. It was a shaky start, but last night he certainly proved his worth.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, especially if you're the keeper that's missing out, I guess, and what was said to you at the time. I wonder what was, but is this justification for Arteta making Raya number 1 at the club this season?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it was a pretty massive night for Arsenal, wasn't it? I mean, they hadn't made the quarter-final stage in their last 7 attempts. They'd lost their last 5, last 16 ties at home in the competition. And it came down to penalties. It was a really nervy game. I thought Porto were particularly impressive, to be honest. There wasn't a lot between them. They were well organised. They carried a threat. And actually, possession was actually very even through the game too. So it wasn't just a deep block. But David Raya pulling out 2 massive penalty saves. The first from Wendell, who I thought was probably Porto's best player, really kept Bukayo Saka quiet. And then that one from Galeno, who scored that goal that gave Porto the advantage going into this. Huge moment for David Raya, who has had his difficulties in the league this season. But I think in this recent run of 8 wins in a row in the Premier League, and of course last night, David Raya has more than proven his worth as Arsenal's number 1.
Yeah, I think he's ended the debate, really, hasn't he? I mean, first of all, he's completely changed the way they're able to play with his distribution, his composure in possession. You know, he's enabled them to really dominate opponents in a way they maybe couldn't before to that level. And then you see his calmness in and out of possession. Mikel Arteta spoke about it in his press conference after the game last night. I was in there listening to him talking, and that is the key difference, I think, between him and Ramsdale. As goalkeepers, maybe there isn't a huge amount between them, but in terms of temperament, in terms of the calmness Raya transmits, then there is a big difference. And we saw him keep his composure. We saw him pull off a big save in normal time from Evan Nielsen. And then he stepped up in the penalties and made vital saves then as well. So, yeah, a night of vindication for Mikel Arteta and a big moment for Raya that maybe he hadn't had yet at Arsenal. So a crucial night for him, I think. OK,
but what does all this mean for Aaron Ramsdale? Because we're going to talk about Euro squads a little later on in the show. And if things aren't looking good for him at the moment, does he have to leave?
It probably does feel that way. I mean, I think he's played less than 200 minutes since the start of December. He obviously came in at the weekend to play against Brentford with David Raya ineligible to play against the club that currently still owns him. Of course, he's still on loan there at Arsenal and made that huge mistake. He did actually respond well in that game. I think it's worth pointing out that he made that great save from Ivan Toney's half volley. There was a great save low down to a Nathan Collins header as well. But he's just not getting the game time, and he's a fiercely ambitious player. You know, he's come through a lot of difficulty in his career in terms of rejection. When he was younger, he's had those relegations with Sheffield United and Bournemouth, established himself as Arsenal's number 1, and then has had this setback. So it feels like with interest in him in January from a number of clubs, that he probably will be sold this summer, and Arsenal will be looking for a new number 2 this summer.
Yeah, I think he's too good to be a number 2 goalkeeper, isn't he? Ultimately, I think he will want to go, and I think if he does go this summer, then it's good for him that he had that game against Brentford where he, of course, made that error, but then performed really well, as Dougie says, either side of the error, especially in the second half, making crucial saves to really help them get that result and get over the line. So if that is his final appearance, and it looks like it might be, given Arsenal are out of domestic cup competitions, and Raya is, of course, so important to the team now, then it's nice that he had that moment, and it was a good reminder of his quality, even with the error in that game.
Yeah, it's not just in goalkeeping. It feels like they have more depth in this squad compared to this time last season, James. Gabriel Martinelli injured, in comes Trossard and scores the goal. So is that a theme with this Arsenal side when we're comparing this season to last?
I think so, absolutely. Trossard levelled the tie just before half-time, courtesy of what was an incredible assist from Arsenal's captain, Martin Odegaard, who we just heard from. And when you consider what Leandro Trossard has done so far this season. It's been remarkable what he's done in the Champions League. He's scored in his first 3 matches at home in the Champions League for Arsenal. The last time that happened was Bukayo Saka. The time before that, Alexis Sanchez, who we've just seen. And we can actually see his goal contributions this season, 11 already in all competitions this season. He's become incredibly important for Mikel Arteta and Arsenal since joining from Brighton in the January of 2023. And he's averaging a goal involvement every 122 minutes, which puts him third on that list behind Saka and just behind Gabriel Jesus as well. Crucially, he's just ahead of Gabriel Martinelli. So we wait to see what happens when the Brazilian returns from injury, because Mikel Arteta now has a real conundrum in that left wing position, but it's a good headache to have for Arsenal because they now have real quality and strength and depth in all positions.
OK, it's not often when we kind of see a great goal like he scored and it's such a crucial goal, yet we're drooling over the assist. It shows how good that was from Odegaard, doesn't it?
Yeah, it was really special. I think, the best sort of languid creators of the 21st century, the likes of Iniesta, Ozil, Zidane, they'd all be proud of that assist. It was a moment of exceptional spatial awareness, timing. The fact he's also falling over as he delivers the pass just made it even more aesthetically pleasing. And it was Trossard's only shot on the night, tucks it away really nicely. But Odegaard, I think, was, aside from David Raya, probably Arsenal's best player. Wendell, who I already mentioned, shackled Bukayo Saka really effectively on the right wing. He struggled to really exert much influence. But it was Martin Odegaard that was constantly probing, picking up the right positions, and nearly grabbed a winning goal, or a goal that would send them through in normal time as well, with that shot that Gabriel Jesus nearly got on the end of as well. And it's satisfying for Odegaard because he did start the season slower than he finished last season, came in for a little bit of criticism. So to have exerted his influence in such a massive game for Arsenal felt like a big moment for him too.
It was one of those moments where you can tell instantly from the sound of the crowd that it was something special. Even before Trossard finished it, there was an acknowledgement of what an amazing piece of skill it was, and to have the composure and quality to then produce that pass as well, it was really special. And it was impressive as well because Porto had actually done a good job on him. They really had nullified him. They'd limited his influence. He'd only had 14 touches in that first half. He only made 6 successful passes, but when the moment arrived, when he needed to show that bit of quality, he produced, and that is what the big players do in those moments. And it was a lovely piece of skill to watch, wasn't it? And a huge contribution in the context of the game.
Yeah, and just how important was it for Arsenal, James, to progress given their recent record?
Well, they've not won anything yet, but it feels like Arsenal have crossed a significant psychological barrier by reaching the quarter-final stage. That's because they'd lost at the last 16 stage in each of their past 7 appearances in the Champions League. That includes some fairly humiliating nights, really, at the Emirates, including their last appearance at this stage in 2017. They were dumped out 10-2 on aggregate by Bayern Munich. And Mikel Arteta, the player, featured in 5 of these. As a manager, last night he finally ended his European curse at home. He previously managed 5 Europa League ties at the Emirates Stadium without winning any of them. So it's taken 14 years and 3 days, but Arsenal are finally back in the last 8 of the Champions League.
Oh, that's amazing, isn't it? Because there's some Arsenal fans in their mid-20s who were still in primary school the last time that happened. There's a thing. Arsenal chances of winning both... let's get greedy now. Of winning both the Premier League and the Champions League.
Incredibly difficult to do both, but, you've got to be in with the shout, and they're in with the shout in both competitions. They are probably the form team in the Premier League right now. I think the Champions League will be particularly difficult because all the favourites thus far have won, and there are teams that have a superior record against Arsenal in latter stages. Man City, Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, Barcelona, they've all beaten Arsenal in big games in recent years and have more experience in latter stages of competition. We talk about their last 16 record, but Arsenal haven't made the semi-finals of the Champions League since 2008-09 when Ronaldo scored a brace. So it feels like a long, long time ago that Arsenal have been at this stage of the competition. I think it'll be easier right now to focus on the Premier League, but as long as they're in Europe, they'll want to try and go for both.
Yeah, I think they'd take one of the two, wouldn't they? I don't think even the most optimistic Arsenal fan could possibly imagine a double this season.
Which would you, if you're an Arsenal fan?
Well, I think the Premier League has to be the number one, doesn't it? I mean, for Arsenal, obviously the Champions League has added significance given they've never won it, but it's a really tough decision. I mean, Premier League is kind of the bread and butter of a team like Arsenal, and that's the one that that I think they'll be thinking of most closely. That's the one that best measures your kind of quality as a team, doesn't it, over the course of 38 games. But I mean, I think what they've lacked in Champions League terms is experience. You know, even the team they put out last night, a lot of those players were new to the Champions League this season, you know, making their first sort of appearances in the competition. And Man City show the importance of having that experience. You know, it took 7 seasons for Pep Guardiola to get this trophy, even though you could easily argue that Man City have been the best team in Europe for longer than a year. So I think that's something they need to build up over time, you know, and last night will help. It was almost a crash course in what the Champions League can throw at you, you know, a wily, streetwise opponent. Remember, Porto play in the Champions League every year. They know exactly what it takes in these games, you know, they know how to disrupt opposition, they know how to make life very, very difficult, and Arsenal came through that. They passed a big test of character, and you know, they can dream. They're in the last eight, they're a very good team. They should be bolstered by this experience they've had against Porto. But yeah, of the two, I mean, I'd say that the Premier League has to be the priority, but you know, who knows?
19 days off for Arsenal now before that big one against Manchester City. The players, or the majority of those players, don't get that time off because they'll be joining up with their international squads. But that sort of break in the rhythm of what Arsenal are doing as a squad, as a collective, as a group, is that a help or a hindrance?
Well, without meaning to sit on the fence, I think you can go both ways with these things. You know, Arsenal, I think if they'd lost last night on penalties, that would have been a really huge stop in their momentum. There'd be a lot of criticism. You know, they were expected to beat FC Porto, despite the fact, as Nick points out, you know, they'd had great performances against Inter Milan and Liverpool in recent years, FC Porto, so they were not easy opponents whatsoever. But Arsenal, the last time they had a break in the season, they went to Dubai. That was after their difficult festive period, and since then they've won 8 out of 8. This is slightly different because there is obviously an international break here, and a lot of their players will be involved in international duty. But what I think is quite interesting is that Martin Odegaard's playing for Norway in 2 friendlies. Norway aren't involved in the Euros. Perhaps he'll be not playing both 90 minutes in those. Gabriel and Saliba aren't necessarily first choice for France and Brazil respectively just yet. So as long as they come through injury-free, I think they can go full throttle for that game against Man City on the 31st.
It's interesting, isn't it? Before last night, I probably would have said it would be a hindrance, that it would disrupt their rhythm at a time when they really need to continue that rhythm. But then, being at the ground last night, watching the players, I mean, they really did look dead on their feet at the end of them, at the end of extra time, some of them. And I think now, you know, having come through these 2 games against Brentford and Porto and emerged with victories in both, I think it's a good time for a break. And we saw the impact of that mid-season break in Dubai. You know, I think it's 9 wins out of 10 since then. So Arsenal have shown the benefits of having that period of rest in the middle of the season, and they'll be hoping this one can have a similar effect, because obviously there is a massive game looming afterwards.